where the mountaintop analogy fails. So the mountaintop analogy is the following: you have a goal and then you go upwards this mountain, and this also allows you to incorporate multiple different elements of, first of all, our representation of 3D world, and then also the analogies one draws that are also represented in language, such as overcoming something and maybe going up as something that is positive, going down as something that is negative, and so on and so forth. But then the mountaintop analogy has a big problem. I first of all also already discussed the mountaintop analogy and where I think it comes short in terms of it being an analogy and with multiple other situations, and also where it has basically its utility. So now I want to discuss the problem of the absolute height of the mountaintop. Now, it seems to be the case that there is this phenomenon which someone already coined the hedonistic treadmill, which is if you are moving forward at a certain, well, first of all, we have kind of the first thing, which is at a certain space, in a certain space. Then if you are moving forward, you're actually moving forward. But then if you are going towards a certain goal and you have a certain pace, and this pace now is your speed also. Now, of course, this would be the inverse in terms of running metrics, but if we now just assume you have a certain speed, and this certain speed could also be your rate of change, in this case positive change toward this goal, then you have basically another layer, which is the first derivative of this action, which occurs otherwise in three-dimensional space, because it's the derivative, it's the speed. And the second derivative then would be the acceleration. So you could basically see these multiple levels as progressing further, and also increasing the speed of progress towards a certain goal. Now, where the mountaintop analogy falls flat, I think, is it is only offering the zeroth derivative. So basically, it is only offering three-dimensional space as the analogy. So once you have the mountaintop, first of all, this is now just a goal, and you cannot go any further. So every mountaintop analogy falls short because, to a certain extent at least, of course, now there can be absolute goals such as, I don't know, running actually. So there could be actually going on a mountaintop would be a very good example that is actually kind of overlapping quite much with the analogy of going to a mountaintop. But now, apart from this, there might also be situations in which it is required to reach an absolute level. So to reach an absolute level of something that it doesn't have this relativity to it. But now there are two distinct things that I actually think that need to be discussed. First of all, once one reaches the mountaintop, it seems to be not very useful in terms of evolutionary psychology, maybe, to now stay at this mountaintop. So once one has reached the mountaintop, once one has reached a certain absolute goal, the goal already has adapted. And this, now, one might argue, this is quite a very unuseful feature, because that means you can never be happy with anything, and you always need to earn more and more and more. But that's exactly what is required to face reality again and again and again. So as long as there are problems that come up with a certain rate, one has to encounter these problems. Similar to a game of whack-a-mole, where you basically constantly have problems that come up, and maybe also the speed is increasing as the difficulty of a game. Let's just say whack-a-mole would be a computer game, then this would probably be also increasing in difficulty as time goes on, because otherwise, well, the levels would not be increasing in difficulty, and so therefore it would be hard to say, okay, I was better at this game compared to you. Now, one could say this is a very big downside of our evolutionary psychology, that we never can sit still. Because we always have to move forward. And that's exactly the point, maybe. Because as soon as you're sitting still in space now, so as soon as you are standing still, you're basically not moving forward. This could be compared to your competitors. This could also be compared to the saber-toothed tiger that hunts you. Now, of course, this is often used kind of... it's almost funny, I would say, to use this as an example, because it's just a classical example that is again and again used, that there is this danger in the past that has kind of led towards different optimizations with evolution in mind. Now, the mountaintop stays at this absolute level, so it would be useful to have something like an algorithm inside that now automatically calculates all of these goals. And to a certain extent, it seems to me that this is exactly what this algorithm, or this part of my mind that adapts these goals, is actually doing. As soon as I reach a certain goal, so in the last couple of months and years, I try to increase my VO2 max, for example, and it has gone from 54 to 55 and then 56, and every stage I reach is like, okay, I'm now at this level, but I probably, which also proves to a certain extent that I can increase my VO2 max, which would be quite useful in order to increase the time I have, in order to basically increase the lifespan. There seems to be some correlation with increased VO2 max and increased lifespan, and also potentially health span. by increasing or by using VO2 max as a proxy for cardiorespiratory fitness. But going back to now, so as soon as I have reached a certain level, my body already has adapted, or the part of my mind that thinks about this already has adapted. Now one could think this is not very useful because then one can never be happy with certain situations. But then on the other side, it would be incredibly complicated, and I also tried this to a certain extent with Excel spreadsheets, with habit tracking and so on and so forth, to come up with goals that actually make sense. Because how much time do you want to spend calculating first and second derivatives of a change rate in terms of, for example, your weights at the gym? Because, well, weights at the gym is kind of an easy analogy again, where you improve at a certain rate. So you improve your absolute weights that you are able to lift or press. And then you also have a certain rate of change. And if the rate of change goes down, you're also kind of stagnating, or the rate of change is constant, then you're also kind of stagnating. You could also then calculate the second derivative, which would be the rate of the change. And so you would then again ideally have an increase in this rate. So it would be maybe like this, and then eventually it would bend over and begin in the beginning again. But it would be quite hard to adapt your goals constantly, to track this data constantly, and to then have an Excel spreadsheet with all of the different situations and the hundreds of different situations for which you kind of have to have goals and standards for, and so it will be quite complicated. And so all of this is outsourced to a certain extent to the part of the mind that constantly adapts all of these goals. As soon as I have a VO2 max of 55, the rest of it, basically the history of me having a VO2 max of 52 seems like, oh, that was an old version of me, that was a very unhealthy version of me, now I'm this better version, and I have to get to a higher VO2 max, because then this increases my lifespan, which increases time I have, and so it also might get me biologically younger to a certain extent, at least if I take the health markers, or the certain health markers, if I output them as age markers, and I then say if I have reduced age markers, then this would potentially get me biologically younger, at least in terms of the functionality, not necessarily in terms of the overall biological age or something like this. So by having this automated, so first of all, the shortcoming of the mountaintop is that it doesn't offer these additional things. It doesn't offer the rates of change, or the rates of the change, rates of the rate of the change, or the rate of the change. So, and also maybe further derivatives one would want to calculate. And so all of this is outsourced basically into the part of the mind that one cannot really control, and you just feel bad about now having a VO2 max of 55, or lifting maybe 100 kilograms on the deadlift compared to the week before where you didn't. And so now, because you now feel bad, you need to do something about this. So you basically, in terms of the dopamine cycle, I think reach kind of a low, out of which you can get out of if you then have still kind of the energy that is required to then do something. If you have fallen into a dopamine trough that is too low and then you don't do anything, then this might be counterproductive. But as long as you are just feeling bad and then you want to change something about your bad situation, then actually you might change something to come out of this bad situation, and therefore you basically not locally, but temporarily increase basically the rate of change in order to accumulate some work that is then done, and then you can look back on this and then you feel good about yourself again, but only until you realize that, well, this is all irrelevant now because you need to do something else now. And so the mountaintop has the big downside of not offering basically the part of your mind, or offering an analogy for the part of your mind, or for the necessity really to move always forward and to also keep either the rate of change constant or also the acceleration constant. And so if I then again take the three-dimensional equivalent to the second derivative, that is usually, well, you get the idea, I think. And so I think it's also, as a kind of short conclusion here, it is also quite useful to have this automatic planning or goal adaptation feature built in, instead of try to solve this with an Excel spreadsheet, which I, at least for some goals, try to do, and it took a lot of time. And now ideally the video would stop, but the key didn't work.